Gaming. That is the word that I'm going to start this video with. Through the recent decades, the video gaming industry became one of the fastest growing and developing aspects of technology. Once extremely limited due to the lack of capacity of technological devices, it has so far become so prominent in our lives that it affects us practically everywhere we go. And for some of us, quite literally even. Video games are rapidly getting closer and closer to becoming one with reality. But how did such immense ascent of the video game's popularity even come to be in the first place? Reasons are many, but there are two main ones when it comes to the matter. Firstly, video games are very stimulating and they can easily take over our everyday routine. And secondly, nearly anybody is free to take on the challenge of developing a video game on their own. All we need is a computer, some coding knowledge, and a vivid imagination to turn our fantasies into reality. But still, despite how utopical it may seem to be a video game developer, it has become a lot more challenging to actually step out of the mist and succeed with a game project of our own. Even though games are quick on the rise, only a small percentage of them actually make it out into the light. Even less gain traction and get highly popular. In order to be a successful video game developer, an individual or a group of them would have to get just the right idea for a game at just the right time. And thus goes the story of RobTop, the game developer who succeeded with a perfectly given opportunity. It was the year of 1987, somewhere in Sweden, when Robert Nicholas Christian Tapala began his journey through life. He was possibly just a regular Swedish kid doing Swedish things like 1.5 million other Swedish kids doing Swedish things, but he was sure to be a special one. While playing his Nintendo at home, he discovered a big love for platformer games. He was fascinated by the fact of how much fun, enjoyment, and versatility can be convoluted in such a simple concept of an animated human-like figure jumping around. Noticing how much potential there is in platformer games, he knew that something bigger could be made out of them. Actually, it would be a mistake to say that. RobTop, contrary to what you might think, didn't actually study video game development. Instead, after finishing basic schooling, he started to study civil engineering. We can all imagine that planning out buildings and infrastructure takes a great deal of focus and dedication, so it's understandable to say Robert loved to partake in his hobbies during his time off studies. A very important one was, just like in his childhood, video games, especially platformer game genre. Since he acquired some basic coding knowledge through the years, he decided to have a go at creating one himself, and with that, his first gaming project called Bounce Ball Thingy came to life. In this game, the player controls a circular ball to navigate through platforms while avoiding obstacles in order to successfully clear stages. Being a person of humor, he never forgot to properly caption the background with text. Bounce Ball Thingy, though, only marks the beginning of what was about to come. It was, after all, his first game that he coded on a poor laptop in his spare time while he was a student. If he had more time, resources, and assets available, what more would he be able to create in the future? After the release of his first game, he temporarily switched off of his preferred platformer genre to puzzling genre. He developed a few small puzzle games that actually sort of started to pop off and gain on downloads. He even felt confident enough to make them purchasable for real currency, but unfortunately, that move turned his success away. The games lost popularity, they didn't bring back many new players, nor did they make much money. Despite that, RobTop still didn't lose his hope yet. He knew that despite video game development being his hobby, he would eventually be able to turn it into something that could make him some side Swedish kronor to spare. There was clearly a difference between Robert, who loved playing platformer games as a hobby, and RobTop, who saw their potential and wanted to make something more out of them. As time went by, Robert kept being held back, and RobTop kept pushing his coding and game development boundaries further and further. Once he turned 26 in the year of 2013, he took all of his possibilities as a gamer and as a developer into consideration and created his magnum opus, his best and most dedicated work, which he titled Geometry Dash. Geometry Dash took RobTop 4 entire months to code from start to finish until it was ready for its official launch in August of 2013. Its idea is simple. The player uses their device to control and steer an icon in the form of a cube, a ship, a ball, and many other different game mode mechanics in order to navigate through the level start to finish without crashing into an obstacle. The concept is relatively reminiscent of some other pre-existing games for mobile devices, that being the Impossible game for the Cube, Flappy Bird for the UFO game mode, Lil Stomper from Jetpack Joyride for the robot game mode, and so on. So, would an average viewer of this video be surprised if I were to say the following statement? The game achieved good ranks, but dropped straight back down to the bottom of App Store very shortly after its release. Well, that's kind of what happened. Robert was, after all, still a student with no advertising budget. The only sort of advertising for Geometry Dash that he could possibly afford with his back then wealth is really only his social media. Advertising through popular websites such as YouTube, according to a professional entrepreneur, which is Google itself, costs between 0.01 to 0.03 US dollars per view. That would mean if RobTop advertised his newly launched game to every single person watching this video, his student purse would have to suffer a loss of around 2,000 US dollars, or even more if this video surprisingly blew up. Either way, to all of you fellow students watching this video, that would be a pretty hefty sum to bear, wouldn't it? Yeah, long story short, RobTop really couldn't afford to advertise his game, so as soon as it gained some traction, it lost its ranks and dwelled in the gamer graveyard. Fortunately though, not for long. Not even a year after sinking down, Geometry Dash made a staggering return and became one of App Store's top chart-conquering applications. The $2 game accumulated millions of downloads within weeks, and it seemed like everybody was playing it. From being the game everyone played during primary school breaks between classes to middle-aged men's distraction from their wives, Geometry Dash realized a success rarely ever seen before in the history of gaming. As we can assume, it was a huge shock to see the game make such a stunning comeback, especially for RobTop, who basically gave up hope on the game ever reaching any success. And with that, an opportunity appeared for him. He could either continue to make a lot of side profit with Geometry Dash until its success died down and finish his studies, or he could fully dedicate his attention to a $2 cube game. Yes, as most of you might have guessed, RobTop dedicated the rest of his youth to developing and updating Geometry Dash in accordance with its players' preferences. From 7 main levels, there are now 21, new features and player icons emerged, and ultimately, Geometry Dash had one feature, one genius strategy that became the motive for its immense success over other games. That feature, which existed since the game's very release and built RobTop's future marketing path, is the key information in this video, and that feature is the level editor. The level editor is one of the 9 menu options in Geometry Dash that allows the game's users to get creative and build their own levels. The player has many options, choosing the building blocks the level would be made of, the correct game mode to navigate through the built obstacles, and a few updates in, players could actually choose their own song that plays as we enter the level, as long as it's on Newgrounds. Basically, the player base, once they were able to create their own masterpieces, became the game's main engine of advertising. RobTop himself said that what helped the game reach its peak success in 2014 was exactly that, the word of mouth. One of the main principles of being successful with projects is what I often refer to when talking about my YouTube story, pioneering. Something that's never been seen or made before has a way higher chance of achieving popularity than something generic, even if well made. Spectating RobTop's Geometry Dash from an outside perspective might leave us wondering, what is so special about it? After all, nearly every concept in it had already been seen before in other mobile games as previously mentioned, and RobTop took a great deal of inspiration from his most beloved hobby from his childhood, platformer games. So, what makes Geometry Dash so unique? In all honesty, only saying the existence of Level Editor would be a big understatement. Yeah, sure, the Level Editor was a great addition to the game's simplicity, but it was not in the slightest what kickstarted it. It was rather the material for something way bigger than that, and that is its player base. I've talked about the Geometry Dash community lots in one of my previous documentaries, so if you're interested, you could go and have a look. But to summarize the most important information, Geometry Dash's community is one of the most strongly connected communities I've ever seen in any games I've played. The Geometry Dash community involves millions of players worldwide, endless friendships, endless projects, levels, groups, events, animations, riddles. And what allowed all of that to happen is exactly as I've said before. The idea of players becoming the game's developers, all being started with the level editor. Upon Geometry Dash receiving massive popularity due to players telling their friends about it, those friends telling their friends, etc., RobTop realized that through community features like the level editor, he could run the game by itself, but let it be carried ahead by the players. There was, after all, a big, ambitious mass of young platformer gamers who were absolutely fascinated by the game's unique features. So they spread the word about it, and Geometry Dash, thanks to them, became more and more popular. This is where RobTop's perfect opportunity stepped in. He realized that what was truly seen for the first time with his project in the whole history of gaming was the power to use its community for benefits. That aspect was what he continued focusing on, taking advantage of every last bit of it, knowing that an opportunity like this would likely never repeat itself again. So, in the end, through his hard work and dedication, what did he achieve? Today, 9 years after Geometry Dash's release, the game is still driven by its player base. I've also mentioned that a lot in the past. It's the popular players that keep the rest of the community excited for new additions such as new hardest levels, and over 10,000 Steam users are constantly playing the game, with the last update dating 5 entire years into the past. They prove that RobTop indeed utilized his once-in-a-lifetime opportunity well, which he still does to this day. For the past few years, he was completely absent from the game's development, and as he came back in 2019, he was welcomed just as much as he was when he released the 2.1 update in 2016 before disappearing. And that whole time without updates, if it wasn't for his genius idea of letting the community run the game, it would have surely lost its popularity entirely. And as a side thought I got while writing the script for this video, what if the idea of players being the game's main source of popularity still hasn't been fully utilized? There are still things in Geometry Dash that RobTop himself has to take care of regularly, such as assigning star rates to new levels that the community builds. How far can that concept possibly be taken? For now, we don't really know, and it's Robert Tapala's decision whether to show us. In the future, and with Geometry Dash's upcoming 2.2 update, he might add new community-related features to the game that would shoot him even further among game developing stars. Or, if someone else were to get the same idea, a new popular community-driven game could emerge out, standing side by side with Geometry Dash. Either way, RobTop went down in history for his possibly accidental idea of establishing player-based driven games. All in all, sometimes, as the story ultimately proves, the best way to achieve your goals is to simply let them sort themselves out. Hello there, this is your Captain Alias, who brought together the information and footage to make this video happen. That process was very long, so if you wish to see more of such content in the future, you can support me by liking the video, commenting your opinions on it, and subscribing to the channel. It helps immensely, and I would like to thank you for staying here until the end. I'll see you later.